Audio test. Doing an audio test. 1, 2, 3. Audio test. 1, 2, 3. Hello everyone, just doing an audio test. How you doing today? Hello everyone, just doing an audio test.
website. Why not do it yourself?
All right, so I'm going to be waiting just a couple more minutes for people to arrive, but just wanted to switch over so you're not just looking at a countdown. And just wanted to say hello, everybody, and welcome to the live stream today. We wait a few more minutes once we switch over to the screen, before we switch over to the screen share and start the presentation, just to give people a little bit to get here. And we are going to be recording today. Of course, this is YouTube, so it's going to become a YouTube video. But what we do is we chop off this beginning part of the wait down because we don't want to start the video with like a 20-something minute countdown. So what we'll do is just edit that part off so that if you watch the recording back, once it's a YouTube video, this part will be cut off. So that way we can just kind of have a little intro here, and that won't be part of the official video. Also, the chat is not part of the recording, just so you know. So my talking and the audio and everything I show on my screen, that's all part of the recording. But the chat is just between us live here right today. We will send all of you a link with for the YouTube video once it's posted, but you can also just check out our channel here, and you can see all of our past live streams, and once we post this video, it'll show up in our channel. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to get notifications of new videos, and as you're watching this today, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And yeah, so we'll give people just another couple minutes. While we're waiting, if you don't mind letting me know a little bit about yourself in the chat, maybe where you're coming from, what your background is, like are you new to design, do you do print design, do you do user experience, or whatever it is that you might be doing. Always interested to get to know the people that are watching. Yeah, somebody was commenting about the rain. It is pouring down rain here in New York City. Streets are flooding and tons of water out there. Luckily, I didn't have too far to walk to come here. Oh, also, this link, there's a link to our presentation slides in the video description down below. I'm also pasting it into the chat right now. And a lot of the information that we're covering today is going to be in those slides, tons of links and useful information. And part of today will be live demonstration outside of those slides, but those slides contain lots of interesting links and resources for you to use later on. Cool. Thanks for those of you who are sharing in the chat. Hola, Hope. We'll give people just about one more minute. Somebody's asking if you need to have programs open. You don't have to have programs open. I'm not assuming that you're going to be following along. If you want to, you can. I'll be talking about a lot of design general concepts that apply across apps. I will get into some specific details about Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, and Adobe Experience Design, but not the kind of stuff where you typically need to follow along. Most of it's conceptual things just to understand. All right, so I think we're ready to get started. For those of you who are watching, just so you know, just so for the official posting of the video, we're going to cut off all this previous stuff. So I'm going to kind of give a break here for a second and then just kind of officially kick it off. So if it feels like I'm kind of restarting, this will be the official start of the YouTube video once we post it. All right. Let me make sure my music is off. Yep, music is off. Okay, good. So, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Dan Rodney, and welcome to Noble Desktop's live stream today. And we're going to be talking about designing for mobile, whether that's websites or apps. We're going to give you all sorts of interesting information, lots of tips and tricks and resources for designing mobile websites and applications. And even though apps and websites are different, they have a lot of things in common as well. So it kind of makes sense to talk about mobile in general, whether it's websites or apps. Before we dive into the topics, just a couple things about today. For those of you who are attending live, I do try to keep an eye on the chat. If it looks like I'm staring off the screen, it's because I'm actually trying to keep an eye on the chat. I have one main screen that I present, which is what you're going to be seeing in a moment once I switch over to sharing my screen, but I also have another screen where the chat is there. So for those of you who are attending live, feel free to ask me questions as we're going through. If I don't answer it right then, it's possible that I just missed it or it's not relevant at that point, and we will have some time at the end for some questions. If I didn't catch it, feel free to ask it again, but it's okay to ask questions as we're going through. This is going to be a YouTube video, so we're going to be recording it and posting it on our channel, and all of you who are attending live will be emailed a link to watch this back later. All right, so just a little bit of background about myself and Noble Desktop for those of you who are not familiar with us. So once again, my name is Dan Rodney. I'm a designer and a developer. If you put developer and designer together, you get diviner. So sometimes I like to call myself a diviner. It's kind of a made-up title, but I like to design and develop. I like to create the visuals as well as code up the websites. So I focus on doing the design and building of websites primarily. So I'm not coding applications, for example. So I might do designs for them, but I'm not coding up. I'm not an iOS programmer. But I do know how to code up websites, primarily the front end, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I do all sorts of kind of all-around design. I do photo retouching and that type of stuff as well. So I'm very fluent in Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, Adobe Experience Design, which is a newer design app. And we're going to be talking about a lot of general design concepts which can work regardless of the app that you're working with. But we will get into some specific details today about individual apps and things to keep in mind if you're working, say, in Photoshop or Illustrator or Sketch or Adobe Experience Design. And as far as Noble Desktop, we're an Adobe authorized training center here in New York City. That's where I'm streaming from right now. We've been around for 27 years teaching all sorts of design and code related technology. So teaching how to create websites, how to build them with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. On the back end, things like WordPress and PHP, how to code iOS applications. We also teach that, as well as Adobe apps like Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Adobe Experience Design. We also teach Sketch, and we have live classes in New York City, and a lot of those you can also attend live online as well. So we live stream a lot of those classes. So don't feel like if you can't make it to New York City that you can't take our training. You can actually, for most of the classes, if you visit our website, it'll say in New York City and live online. And so then you can attend our classes whenever you want. Well, not whenever you want, but you can still attend classes wherever you are. But it's all live, so it's basically there's people in the classroom and people online all watching live as it's going on. We also sell great workbooks, which are mentioned here on the screen next to me, and they're step-by-step guides that are great for learning these things in more detail. Like if you want to learn more about Photoshop, we got or Sketch or Adobe Experience Design, we've got great step-by-step project-based workbooks to go through and teach you how to use those apps. So Noble Desktop's been around for 27 years. I've been teaching here for 17 years and doing course development and all sorts of stuff with Noble Desktop. So that's our background, and now we're ready to get started with today's topic. There is a presentation. The link for this is going to be in the video description down below the video, and I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen so that you guys can see this. For those of you who are attending live, I'm also pasting a copy of it in the chat as well. And you don't have to open that up on your computer to follow along because I'm going to be demonstrating with it on this screen, so you can just sit back and relax. But you'll want to keep that link around for the future because there's going to be some great reference in there, tons of links and useful things that you'll want to be able to refer to later on. In this presentation, you just use your arrow keys, left and right arrow keys, to move around the presentation, or if you're on a mobile device, you can swipe on the mobile device. All right, so first of all, just to make sure that we're motivated enough to understand how important mobile is, and even if you are, you sometimes need to motivate your clients to just express the importance of mobile. And they might not be thinking that mobile is as important as it is. So even if you don't need this info, this might be useful info to show or talk to a client about. Back in 2017, mobile web traffic eclipsed desktop traffic. And so if you look at this trend line here of desktop usage is just going down for web traffic, and mobile usage just keeps going up. And so you can imagine desktops are just going to continue to be used less and less. And they might plateau at some point, but mobile is just increasing and continuing to increase every month, pretty much. Now, when you look at per country, it's interesting that depending on the country that you're in, you might have more mobile usage than others. And interestingly enough, over here, might be a little bit hard for you guys to read this, but Nigeria is 81%, and India is 79% mobile in terms of how much of their web traffic is from a mobile device. And it's kind of interesting for the U.S. actually, and let me see here. United States, is that in here? Yeah, United States, that's down here to 37%. So in the U.S. is only 37%. Now that's of this particular place and their tracking of it. But I think the reason for that, why some countries have a lot more mobile usage than others, is the U.S. has a really good wired network. So people have good wired connections compared to mobile. Mobile took a lot longer to develop well in the States just because it's so big. Like Europe advanced much faster in mobile speed because it was just physically smaller area, so they could build out the network quicker. And America is just physically large, so we didn't switch over to mobile as early on, and it's harder to upgrade the network and make them faster. And a lot of other countries actually have faster internet than us. Depends on the country. But anyway, so it's just interesting that some of them, Nigeria, 81%. So there's hardly anybody using a desktop in Nigeria. So it does change from country to country. This, I think, is a really interesting chart here. PCs are this line right here going across, and they kind of peaked, and then they're just going down in terms of users of desktops. And mobile users is this light blue here. So mobile users would be mobile phones, right? So mobile phones started a long time ago. And of adults, the number of adults here, you look, almost all adults have a phone. Not everybody. So there's still more people that could get a mobile phone that don't have a mobile phone. But of all of those people that have mobile phones, this darker blue right here is iOS and Android phones. So almost half of the people that have a cell phone have an iOS or Android smartphone, which means there's still a huge growth potential for smartphones. And but smartphones have just massively eclipsed. I mean, you look at that trend line right there, massively eclipsed PCs. And so I love the title of this, Mobile is Eating the World. Basically, mobile was one of the biggest game changers in all of technological history. The iPhone is the best-selling product in history. It's massive in terms of sales, and but it's not just the iPhone. It's Android and mobile. You got this one device that can do so much, and it's just changing tons of industries, including web design and app design. So really, you have to change your thinking. If you're not thinking of mobile as the new normal, it is. For a lot of people, mobile is their primary way of connecting to the web, or it might be their only computer. I know numerous people where they don't really need a desktop or a laptop. They can do everything on their phone or their tablet, and that's their primary way. And for some people, that's the only way. There's people that their first computers are a phone or a tablet, and they've never even had a desktop or a laptop. So that's why people are talking about mobile first design, thinking of, well, if mobile is the norm, why don't we design for that first and other screens later? So let's design the mobile version of a website, for example, first, and then think about how desktop users might interact with that. So even if you knew all that stuff or had an idea of how important mobile is, that stuff might be useful to convince a client that might not be as sold on the importance of mobile. And now we can get into design. Before we get into specifically designing websites and apps, I just want to talk about that mobile's eating the world concept, in that mobile is affecting all design. It's affecting so many things. In fact, logos are now being designed, or if people are redesigning logos, they're designing or redesigning them so that they work well for apps and small screens. Sometimes you'll get a logo and it might be a perfectly good logo, but it doesn't reduce well, so it might need to be redesigned to work on a small screen or for an app. For example, USA Today. I remember when I first saw this design, I was walking through Grand Central Station and I saw some ads with the USA Today circle. And I just kept thinking, when I first saw it, I was like, it's a circle. they made, and I just imagined, like, how are you trying to sell this to a client? Like, if you're the designer, you're like, your new logo is a circle. And I just imagined the client being like, how much should I pay for that? But I'm not making fun of it. It's just, I can just imagine the discussion with the client, trying to convince them of the circle. It's actually, if you look at it as just a circle, that doesn't give you the whole idea of the usage. There's actually a much broader usage. And so here, they're using that circle in many different ways. It's actually not just an icon, it's actually a design system. They're changing colors, they're putting things in it, and as a design system, as a broader use, it's actually a really pretty ingenious thing. Each one of these little things could be its own app icon, or they use it as branding for the different sections within the newspaper. And so it's kind of brilliant, actually, that the unifying part is the circle, and what's in there can be so diverse, and you could do so many things. If you want to read more about it, you can check out their redesign. But it's actually a pretty interesting design system, which is pretty cool, actually. But all of those things worked well at smaller sizes and could be kind of iconographized. That's a word that I just made up. They could become icons. Another example, Holiday Inn changed their logo, and this literally looks just like an app icon. And interestingly enough, most of their apps don't use that icon. They put it in there with a bunch of other stuff. They don't just have it be just that app icon. One of their apps used to use it just as the app icon itself, but it looks like an app icon. I remember driving down the road, seeing that, and be like, hey, that looks just like an app icon. So really, mobile's affected all types of designs. So not to belabor that, but just kind of an interesting thing that the mobilification of the world has just changed how we think about all types of design. So responsive design in particular is one of the things we're going to be talking about today, and that concept of a responsive website is that prior to a responsive website, which is one that adapts to different size screens, there was the idea of doing separate mobile and desktop sites. So you'd have two different versions of each page, a mobile version and a desktop version. And some sites still have that. In fact, Amazon still has that. Amazon.com is not a responsive website. It has a mobile optimized version. They have a desktop oriented version as well, but they don't have a responsive website technically. They have a mobile app, they have a mobile website, and they have a desktop website. And even Apple.com for the longest time didn't have a responsive website as well. They eventually got that. But there's still lots of big sites that don't actually have responsive sites, that have this M. domain, which is like a mobile domain, and they might redirect between them. One of the advantages to a responsive site is that instead of having to keep two different versions, a mobile and a desktop, is that you only need one. And that one version of each page can adapt, and it can change to any size screen. So what about tablet sizes, right? If it's just mobile and desktop, what about all the different sizes of mobile? Tablets, big phones, small phones, any size screen. So a responsive site is going to flex and change and adapt to any size screen. It doesn't matter what it is. And that's by only having to keep one code base of your HTML and then just using CSS, cascading style sheets, which is how we style the page, we can adapt the layout and change it across different screen sizes. One reason that somebody might still want to have separate mobile and desktop sites is, first of all, just because they've already developed it. Some sites did this early on, like Amazon had it way before responsive kind of became a thing. So, if it's already working, they might not see huge advantages right now to invest in turning it into a responsive version of the website. And if you want different experiences on mobile and desktop, if you want vastly different experiences or even fairly different user experiences, going with a separate mobile and desktop site might work better, because you are going to have one version of a page if you're creating a responsive page. And you can adapt it, you can change things, but if you're basically building two separate, completely different versions of the site, responsive really isn't the way to go for that, because responsive is really geared towards, hey, for the most part, these are very similar. We want to change some things around, but it's pretty much the same content, might be arranged a little bit differently, but for the most part, it should be one that is adapted to different size screens. But for the most part, the trend is towards responsive because it is simpler and it's a unification of experiences that designing one experience across all screens is easier than designing two different experiences for mobile and desktop. So as a designer, it's a bit challenging because you have to think of a flexible design that can work across any screen size. Things might be next to each other on a desktop, but they might be on top of each other on a mobile device, and or they might be next to each other on a desktop and turn into a slideshow on a mobile device. You could do all sorts of different experiences. So let's take a look at a couple different examples. I wanted to choose a variety of different appearances and things. So I chose some kind of varied examples. And to see how it's responsive, we're going to simulate different size screens by resizing the browser window. So as I resize the browser window, you can look for differences. In particular, for example, down here, notice there's like a title and a subtitle, like a little caption there. And as I reduce the screen on a smaller size screen, those captions go away. They figured, hey, they're nice, but we don't have to have them there if we don't have screen space. Let's just ditch them because they're not super important. Also, if I get down to a smaller size screen that's not as wide, they figure, hey, we can take that navigation and instead of making this content smaller so the navigation can be on the left, let's just rearrange it so the content can still be big. We'll just put the navigation up on top. Still keeping our 4 columns across here, which on bigger screens, the images are bigger. On a smaller screen, the images get a little bit smaller. Then they just bump down. As we get to even a smaller screen, the navigation changes. They actually get rid of the icons. Technically, they still have space. So I might wonder, why did they get rid of those icons? Well, you can actually get rid of things to speed up the loading of your page. For example, if you're not loading icons, that's a little bit less data to download, so the mobile experience could be faster. You do have to make sure that you code it properly so that it actually doesn't download that asset. Some ways that you code the website might actually still download that asset even though you can't see it, so you won't actually get a speed boost. But if you code it properly, you can hide something and the browser won't download it, so it would actually load the page faster. Also, here we're getting 2 columns instead of the 4. So now we're getting 2 rows. So it's a 2x2 grid instead of a 4 column, 1 row. And as we get even smaller, 2 columns don't even fit there, so everything just stacks on top of each other. And the navigation changes once again because they don't have space to put the logo and the navigation next to each other, so they move it up top. So you can really change a lot. Also those little descriptions down here, those things went away. They were here, but those disappeared on the smaller size screens. They are just kind of a repetition of some of these things here. They were just trying to draw people's attention to it so you can get them elsewhere. They were just a repetition that I guess they figured wasn't needed on small screens. All right, so the WWF, the World Wildlife Organization, here's their website. This is what people would commonly call a card-based layout, so it kind of looks like little cards on the screen. They have nice little rollover effects where the images get bigger and the text changes. Yeah, that's kind of cool. This gets a little smaller. So some neat little effects. Now, as I resize the window, first of all, notice the image is scaling or being cropped. So that changes our design thought about images. For example, you have to have maybe, if your aspect ratio is going to change, you have to make sure that your primary focus point is not too close to an edge that might be cropped off, because the outside edges here get cropped off, and we want to make sure that that interesting part isn't too close that it ends up getting cut off as part of that. Now, the navigation, as they get smaller, they simplify it down to the two main things of donate or adopt. Those things are on the bigger screens and they still stand out because of the coloring, but they really wanted to make that prominent, so they got rid of the other navigation behind this little menu and put these here more prominently. These things relay themselves out. So on a bigger screen, they're next to each other. Then they start to stack as we get even smaller. In this case, they just reduce in size. And then eventually reduce even in size more. Down below here, there's some circles. Here we've got two columns because they're pretty small, so they fit next to each other. Still have the two columns. Oh, now we have three columns. And eventually on bigger screens, we have six columns. So they're rearranging those things as they fit based on the screen. Take a look at two more examples. This one I like just because it was so very square and modular. When they have the width, they put these things on the right. And when they don't, they put them on the bottom. And on a small screen, they actually just get rid of those to focus on the main thing. And lastly, this one. So all of these examples are very different because I wanted to show you different examples. There's lots of things you can do with responsive sites. It's just your creative ideas of how you want to change things. Here, with all the ties, they wanted to still focus on those ties. So as they get to smaller screens, they didn't shrink them. They didn't put them in multiple rows. They just made an overflow so you can scroll through them. So that way they still kept them large and prominent, and you just scroll through them. So that's interesting. Now these elements down below, on mobile, they stack on top of each other, and on bigger screens, when they can fit next to each other, they do. And I really like their navigation that they have here. Very bold, nice. I love the color thing, that you could just see the different colors. This guy totally looks like he's excited to be photographed, doesn't he? But I just love the boldness and the ease of clicking on any of these things, and particularly on a mobile device where you got your big fat finger and you're trying to tap on something, and these are nice big touch targets. Notice that here, these three images stack on top of each other, whereas on a desktop, they're next to each other. Also in the collection, notice the photos are on top of the text, whereas here, they're next to the text. So this is a more single column, kind of friendly design. Also other things like when they have available space for the search to be exposed, they have that. But on a smaller screen, you have to click a button to expose the search. There's a cart on a small screen, but on the big screen, there's the word cart and a number of how many things are in the cart. So those are just a few samples of different types of responsive sites. There's a bunch of different ones out there, but I wanted to choose some different varieties of examples. So how are we supposed to really kind of handle this? Early on, when you're first designing something, you really want to do some wireframing with real content as much as possible. And the wireframing, if you don't know what wireframing is basically I think of it like the sketch stage. You're just doing something loose and not tight, final, perfected visuals. Just really planning out where is the content going to go, like what pages is what content going to go on, what's going to be at the top, what's going to be underneath that, what's going to be underneath that. So you're figuring out priority of content, like what's the most important things, what are the calls to actions, and you're figuring out the flow of the website. Of people are going to go here and they're going to see this, and then they might click over to this screen and see something else. What is the sequence of screens, and within a page, what's the priority of content within the page? What are the headings and the paragraphs, and how many pullouts are we having? Like, if we're going to create some features, how many features are we going to have? How are they going to be arranged? And really thinking big picture stuff, and not worrying about like fonts and colors and that sort of stuff, but really just getting the content onto the page and working about that, and focusing on a mobile screen, how's this going to work versus a desktop. And by focusing on the content first, it really helps you to think of a good kind of user experience of what's the user going to see first, what are they going to do next, before you get into like making all these things look perfect and think about fonts and colors. And you want to expect more back and forth between the designer and the developer, because once you do come up with a design and you give it to the developer, it's very possible that there's going to be in-between states that you didn't think about. If you're going to create some mock-ups, let's say for mobile, tablet, and desktop, there's in-between stages that something might not look very good, and you're not going to be able to design up all of those sizes in a fixed layout program like Photoshop or Sketch or Illustrator or Adobe Experience Design, because those are fixed layout design tools. Most design tools don't give us a flexible, responsive canvas to be designing on. And so you're creating a design at a fixed size, and those in-between stages, something's going to come up. So expect that developers, they're either going to have to just make a decision, or they're going to have to kick it back to you and say, hey, what do you want us to do at this size? And so if the developer makes a decision, you might not like it, and you have to go back and say, hey, can you fix this at this size? Which brings us to that you might want to bring developers into the process a little bit earlier, even if it's just talking to them to make sure that something you're planning works. It doesn't mean that they have to actually start developing things, but maybe talk to the developer and just say, hey, I think I want to do this. Is this going to work okay on mobile and desktop? Do you see any problems with that? And involve them in the process, even if it's just asking them questions and making sure that what you're planning is going to work. Right, show them your wireframes and say, hey, do you see any problems with this? Instead of waiting until the end, until you have pixel perfect designs, and then developers like, no, that totally doesn't work. And one thing you may do is move to some sort of working code mockup earlier on, maybe even before you've done pixel perfect designs. Once you've done some wireframing, you might start to do some coded mockups. Or if they're not coded mockups, maybe some clickable prototypes or something, and see how users interact with them. Or if they're a coded mockup, just see how they work across devices, and is there going to be some sort of weirdness? And going to something that kind of is a little bit more of a working thing early on can help you to find potential problems earlier. Which does bring us up to the designers. It does help if designers know how to do some coding. You might even want to do some quick coding mockups yourself just to see how something's going to feel. And if you want to learn code, of course, we have some great programs for that. Individual classes, we have a certificate, and we have workbooks as well for that. So I started mentioning this about user experience and thinking about a good user experience, but there's all sorts of design. Types of design. There's visual design, there's user experience design, and so how it is to use an app. Is it easy to use? Is it fun to use? Is it easy to use? Those are all things that are part of the broader design concept. And what are you doing? Are you doing the user experience design? Are you doing the visual design? User experience design, or UX, is just as important as any other kind of design. All aspects of design are important. But it's especially important because even if you have something beautiful, if it's not easy or enjoyable to use, then people might not want to use it. So you really want to have something that works well and that is also beautiful. So you don't want to just pour all your design effort into just making it look nice if the thing doesn't work well at all. Which brings us to when you're using a mobile website, for example. We're going to talk about websites right now. The navigation of how you move around within the website is important and affects the usability of the website. How easy is it to find other things? Do you even notice that there's things you can go to. I'm going to make a new browser window here and just put it over here on the side so it's small. I'm going to drag and drop those links into there because I need a small, narrow window for these, because these are mobile navigation. For these to work, I'm just going to drag and drop that in there. All right, so notice this little thing up here is not there on bigger screens. That's why I needed to go to a smaller screen. So in this case, Explore, which was kind of an interesting choice. It doesn't say menu or navigation or anything, just Explore. And the arrow almost implies that like a little menu is going to drop down. But when I click on it, I just go to this other thing, and I see that I can go to a couple other places. There's actually really not a whole lot that I can explore. And most likely you're on a small screen, so you'd probably maybe see something about like this. And if I saw this, I'd be like, no, didn't want to explore there. And then I'd hit the back button, which in this case luckily works. But what was interesting is this Explore button actually just went to the bottom of this page. Notice there's a back to top, which takes me back up the top. This actually, it's just a very tall page, and the navigation's only at the bottom. They don't have navigation at the top, just a button to jump to the bottom. Now, if you were going to do this, I don't like that it just jumps there. I'd at least like to animate down there so that people know that they were jumping to the bottom of the page. Some sites I've seen, the back button doesn't work. At least here it does work. But some sites I've seen, you click on it, it jumps to the bottom of the page, but you don't know it. And the back button doesn't work, and you're like, how do I get out? You're looking for a close button, and then eventually you might realize, oh, they just scrolled me to the bottom of a page. I don't see many sites doing this, and for me, that's a good thing. I'm not a big fan of this technique. I think it's a bit weird to jump to the bottom of a page just to go to another page. So I'm not a big fan of that, but it is something that I've seen some websites do. And I started with it because I'm not a big fan. I like the other types of navigation better. So let's explore some other types of navigation. So this is a very typical kind of navigation that you click a button and the navigation just slides open. It either sometimes slides over a page or it slides the page itself down, and then you can choose a page to go to, and any page you want to go to, you just slide that open and jump to another page. So it's a pretty common navigation type there. Let's see another one here. Same button here, but this one actually takes over the entire screen. And if you have too small of a screen, then they actually kind of adapt to try to squeeze in. Probably nobody's going to have a screen even smaller than that, but they kind of squeeze to fit the screen, which is interesting. And then if you don't want to be going to anything there, just click out of it. And I think that's a really important lesson to learn, that if you're hiding your navigation behind a button of some sort, regardless of what that button is, whether it says menu, whether it's this icon, know that people don't know what's in there, but they might be curious, and you don't want to penalize them for being curious. So if you can go into a menu, you should definitely be able to close that menu. And most sites get this right. Like, you can open it and you can close it, no problem. But occasionally I go to a site where the menu opens up and it covers the screen, and there's literally no way to get out of it. They just assume that you are going to click one of those things. And a lot of times in those cases, the back button doesn't work. Like in here, you can't close that menu by hitting the back button. You have to literally close that, which is how most sites work. The back button doesn't close a menu. But just make sure that you always include a close button, even if you're taking over the full screen, because people might want to look in there and say, oh no, actually, I wanted to see what was there, but I'm actually not interested, and they want to get out. They don't want to have to go to another page and come back just so that menu gets closed. There is off-screen navigation where the button reveals something that it was not on screen. It's off the screen, and it kind of pushes the page over. So it's like, hey, it's there. It was just hidden. And the ones that are on the side here like this, if you have a lot of things and they're kind of categorized, this can be useful for that type of navigation where you have a lot of stuff, and you can drill down. You can see the overview of the categories and then drill down in. You just have to make sure that this is well organized and intuitively structured so that people can find where they want to go to. And they do have a search in case you can't just figure out where it is. You could just search for it. Spotify has a very similar kind of idea. They have a lot less navigation in it, of course. And this one, instead of sliding kind of from under the page, this one covers over the page, but it's still very similar kind of idea. I like the animation that they have on the 3-line menu there, and that they turn into an X. I like that little animation there. I also like that a lot of times in these menus you can click off of the menu and that will close the menu as well. Just as a reminder that skinny ties, this is a different type of navigation, but I really like the finger-friendly nature of this, which is really important when creating a navigation, that you don't want things too close and too small for each other. And then there's a technique called priority plus. And that actually, to really understand it, you have to be on a bigger size screen to see all the things. And that when you're on a smaller screen, that some of those things get put into an overflow menu. That's the plus idea. But what gets put into there is based on some sort of priority, based on what the designer decides. So for example, here, as I get even smaller, one of those things is going to have to go away. But notice the thing that goes away is the blog, right? It wasn't just that the rightmost thing went away. It was based on some sort of priority system. Hey, the blog gets put into there. And then what gets put next? Oh, the portfolio. Because really he wants to show about services and contact more than portfolio or blog. And then, that's his priority that he chose for this website. And that's why it's priority plus, priority with the plus, the more, going into some sort of overflow. Sometimes it actually says more, or there's a plus there or something. And that's kind of an interesting design pattern, because the idea is, instead of throwing everything into the menu, keep some of your most important navigation exposed and only put some overflow into there. I really like that idea, because if you put all of your content for a menu into a menu button, it decreases discoverability. You don't know what's in there. And so this way you still see services and contact right away without having to go into there. So that's quite nice. So these are just some examples of some mobile navigation, just to get you thinking here. And there's a visual aspect to it, but it's also a usability aspect to how those things affect your design and the working of your site. So mobile design, in that idea of mobile's eating the world, mobile design is also affecting desktop sites as well. And that burger, the 3-lined menu, if you haven't heard it called the hamburger, it's called the hamburger because it's like the bun and the burger in between. And burgers are on the menu, but on bump. I know it's a bad joke, but got to say it anyway. So the hamburger menu is how we call that. It's the 3 lines. Sometimes people are rebels like Apple, and they say, hey, we don't want to do 3 lines. We want to do 2 lines because we're simpler than everybody else. But it's the same concept. Sometimes people do the 3 dots. Like, for example, Chrome now does the 3 dots. Chrome, the desktop app here, and the mobile app as well, actually. They have the 3 dots here. They used to be the 3 lines. And now, actually, before the 3 lines, it was a wrench, it was a gear. Like this icon here in Chrome has undergone numerous icons, and they keep changing it. They went from the hamburger to this, which people often call the kebab because it looks like a shish kebab. That icon is more heavily used on Android, and so since Google's behind Android, they're trying to get that design system out there more and use it throughout all of their products. But the idea is that there's more stuff behind it. It ultimately came from the idea of like a list. And sometimes you'll actually see like a dot and a line, a dot and a line. Maybe sometimes the lines are different things because it kind of implies like it's a bulleted list. It's a list of things. Some people know what that is, and some people don't know what that is. It is used widely on a lot of sites. But there's still some people that don't know what it is or just don't think really to click on it as much. And what's interesting is it really got started on mobile because we didn't have much screen space. So how do you condense all your navigation into a tiny little space, put it behind a button like that? But then people said, well, we want to have a clean design on the desktop. So they're starting to use it on desktop sites. Like for here, this is the Visit California website, and they have the hamburger. It's a big hamburger, but it's still a hamburger. There's like no navigation here unless you click on that button and then, no, I don't want to sign up for your newsletter. All the navigation's over here. You can get out of it. You can click on that, but there's like virtually no navigation up here you have to click that button. Now that decreases discoverability. Not as many people are going to click on that and explore it. Some people are just going to scroll down and see what's in here, and they might not see all the site has to offer. So yes, it's clean, but should we do it? It's a good question. Here, this is even hard to see the word menu up there. And now they put the 3 lines, they put the hamburger icon with the word menu. Then they do a full screen takeover here. So it's kind of visually interesting. But some people, since that's so small, they might not even really notice that. And there might be parts of the site that they don't go to because they just don't discover the menu that's there. So really, it was invented for managing the space on a small screen. And then designers were like, hey, I want to clean it up on the desktop. But you always have to think about, are people going to go into it? Now you've added an extra click, right? So you're requiring more work on the user's part. So there's a lot of debate as to whether hamburger menus are even good on mobile. So there's lots of debate. I linked to a couple articles here. This one's a great one of why and how to avoid hamburger menus. And this one's interesting. They talk mainly about apps in this case. They give a bunch of different examples. I'm going to scroll down to one that I want to talk about in particular. And so, for example, here. So here, this is like an exposed menu where the things open on the left. And they color-coded here just so you can see that these things turned into these things. So instead of having an off-screen nav where you don't see it unless you click a button to go there, you could turn it into tabs at the bottom. And that's how iOS apps were meant to be from the very beginning, just tabs across the bottom. But then people thought, hey, I can make this little menu. Facebook for a long time had menu buttons up at the top. And they still actually have some, like, for example, right here for the list of people. But Facebook went away from those menus and they switched to tabs at the bottom, in part because it exposes that stuff so they see it. But also you can put badges like for messages and notifications, whereas if that was tucked away in an off-screen menu, you couldn't even see that. So it really does expose information and makes it easier for people to find. Now you might say, well, I can't fit enough tabs down there. Well, that's what the more is for. And there's an example of that here. So you can always click on the more and then you can see additional things. But so you put in terms of content priority, you put the most important things first and then the additional things that aren't quite as important under the more. But at least they see it. There can be the icon with the text. Those things I think could be all useful. In some cases, you might have people scroll through the stuff for additional use there. In some apps like this, like for tools, that might make sense. Probably not so much for like an informational app like something like this. But there's a big debate as to whether you should use the hamburger or not. Now, some people like the hamburger and they think that it's just something that people will get used to, and as time goes on, they'll get more used to it. So this is an article defending the use of the hamburger. So there's people that can argue on both sides. And so I wouldn't say, always do it or never do it. I think it just all depends on the particular use case. This is an interesting article. Ignore this huge, bad image. No, I don't want to get push notifications. This is actually the hamburger, just like the giant, most huge hamburger icon you've ever seen. It almost looks like an error, but that's actually just the hamburger menu. And it's kind of an older article, and some of the things have gone missing. Although if you click on it, you actually get the bigger version. But I liked linking to this, just even though it's old, because they were trying out different versions. The 3 lines with an outline, 3 lines with the word menu. And they just tried out different ones to see which one made more money. I actually tried out some other ones. This one, because their app uses pink, they wanted to make it stand out and they used pink. The winner for them, the one that made them more money, was one that made it stand out with a pink background. So that's interesting because it called it out and drew attention to it. And it made people say, hey, what's behind there? And so they actually made a little bit more money from that because people explored it more. Instead of just buying whatever was on the page, they're like, hey, let me go check out other things. And they made a little bit more money. So I think, in this case, they did the right thing. They tested it. They tried out different things to see what was right for their audience. And, I think it all depends on the particular website or app. You have to see what's right for your particular case. I do like the idea of putting maybe the icon with a word like the word menu. I do like that idea to kind of explain it, or even just sometimes using the word menu instead of just those three little lines. I understand the aesthetics of the menu icon are nicer, but I think you really have to look at your audience and think about what's right for your audience. And ultimately, that's just your initial research into your users. Once you've actually built the thing, test out maybe some different alternatives and see which works best. Actually, the best way to really know is to do some A/B tests, and you'll see for your audience which one performs best. So, finger and small friendly design. I mentioned this a little bit before about being finger friendly. Your thumb's natural reach is near the bottom of your device. And I'm actually going to switch back to, here actually. Let's make that not quite so big. So if you're holding a device, you don't normally hold your device like this. You don't reach at the top, you reach at the bottom. So you're naturally holding it towards the bottom. And so your thumb or your fingers are going to more easily reach the bottom than the top. Now, with your other hand, of course, you come in and hit the top part. But if you're one-handing it, it's much easier to hit the bottom part. And that's actually why Apple made that you can do a double tap so that it brings it down within reach. So normally, if the interface is up top, you could just double tap on the home icon, the home button, and it comes down. So that's something to think about when you're designing, especially an app. You definitely want to think about it when designing an app that people are going to be interacting with a lot. Think about where you're going to put your controls. That's why content that you just look at, that you're not really interacting with, a lot of times we keep that on top, and the controls that we might be interacting with, we keep them on the bottom. Testing this on a real device is going to help you because your mouse can go anywhere, but when you test it on a real device and you hold it in your hand, you get a better sense of how to reach through something. And let me show you an example of this. Instagram, which a lot of you are probably already familiar with, the things that you look at, the picture, they put at the top. There are some controls at the top to go back or next, but those are not things that you're doing a lot of, that you're really interacting with a lot. They're just kind of a one-time press. The things you're doing a lot of is maybe switching between your library, your photo, or your video, choosing the particular filter that you want to use. Those things are all down at the bottom, all within reach of your thumb. So you kind of look at the top, but you interact with the bottom. So when you think about small screens, right, and you think about big fingers, an important thing is about you want to make sure you don't crowd the controls. Like back here, these things are nice big touch targets. These things are appropriately spaced. These two icons here are far apart from each other. Nothing is close and crowded. You've got plenty of big controls with plenty of space in between. Or even if these controls are close to each other, they're big enough that you don't have to worry about accidentally pressing the next one. The other thing is that you want to hide things that aren't relevant at the moment. You can't show everything that your app can do all on one screen at a time. For example, back here, there are more controls behind each one of these things. And if you go into that, then you can have more controls. But they didn't show you this filter and the controls all at the same time. Now, what you hide and show is part of the design process. You have to know what's the most important, most common uses of your app or your website so that you don't hide something that's really important. So you have to know your website or your app really well to know the use cases. For example, Google Maps. In Google Maps, there's lots of things that they can show. There could be lots of things that you can show. And also there's a little button here for overlays of like traffic and all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of buttons they could make. They could have filled up the whole screen with options and buttons, but they couldn't because you need to be able to see the map. So they're focusing on a lot of content and the things you do all the time. Like you want to search for something, so the search is there. Imagine if they hid the search. Like you have to hit a button to go to another screen and then you search there. That's like a very common thing you do, and if they hid it off screen, that would be another tap, and it wouldn't be as intuitive to find. It would be more work to get there. I thought it was actually interesting that they took up this amount of screen space for explore food and drinks near you, because that really does take up some space at the bottom, covering over the map. They didn't used to do that, but they really, whether they know that you're going to use it or not, they want you to use that. So I think sometimes there's the designing for what you know people need to do, and there's designing for what you want them to do. In this case, Google, I think, wants you to explore what's around you, and so they want to make that prominent. They also have the tell me where I am and directions, which are very useful things. This button for the overlays of showing traffic, switching between the map and the aerial view, that's a button that just shows you specific visual options. They do use a hamburger here that you can click on, and you can get to other things. So there's a lot more to the app, but they figured that's less important, so we can hide that behind a different button. So the designer of this app had to decide what are the most common things that people want to do, and what features do we want to expose, and what are we going to put somewhere else. All right, so those are a lot of kind of design things to be thinking about. And we do want to get into creating graphics and working in our design apps, and how can we do all this kind of stuff once we know what we want to do, making sure that we're doing things properly for websites and for apps. So when we get into creating graphics for websites, when we're saving them, we can save things as pixel-based graphics or vector-based graphics. And before we get into the pixel-based graphics side of things, for websites, we should be today using SVG. SVG is Scalable Vector Graphics. So we can now, in our web pages, use vector graphics. Before HTML5, we couldn't do this, but with HTML5, they added native support for SVG. We have great browser support now. You look at the whole row here is all green. It's awesome. Even going back to older versions of Internet Explorer, anything from IE9 on all support SVG. Granted, IE8 doesn't support SVG, but at this point, I don't support IE8. So any new browser that is going to be used by predominantly, the majority of users has really good SVG support. If you really do need to support older browsers, you can do fallbacks to a PNG file or something. But for the most part, I think at this point, you're safe just purely using SVG and not having a fallback. So anything that's vector, like iconography, logos, that type of stuff, the beauty of vector graphics is that they can scale to any size without you losing quality. They work on any resolution device, so whether you have low-res devices or high-res devices, one file looks great on any size device. And I say device instead of screen because if you print these, they print beautifully too because they are vector things. So, you might not be so concerned about printing, but if you are, these look great on screen and they print well too. They're really small to download, and so they download fast. So they look great and they're less filling, and so they're awesome. Definitely should be using those. Nice thing about those is you don't have to really worry. Ideally, you'd make them at the size you want to use them. So that when the web developer brings them into the page, they just come in at that proper size. But even if you didn't make them at the right size, the web developer can scale them up or down to any size they want, and they don't have to worry about the quality. It's not going to degrade quality when you make them bigger or smaller. What we do have to think about in terms of size is when we get into pixel-based graphics. And that gets us into screen resolution and image resolution. Just kind of a bigger, longer topic, and we're about halfway through. So I think this is a good time to take a 5-minute stretch break, restroom break. When we get back, we'll talk about 1x versus 2x graphics. And I'm going to put up a timer here just so we don't lose track of time here. And when this timer ends, we'll get started. So go grab a drink, use the restroom, take a quick break. Nancy, you can't make an animated SVG like you make an animated GIF, but you can animate them. You can animate them using JavaScript. In particular, later I'm going to be talking about GreenSock, which is a great JavaScript library to animate things, and you can animate anything on the page, including SVG. So it's not an animated SVG format, but the SVG in your web page can be animated using JavaScript, and you can do amazing things with it. Gonna put a little waiting music on here. Okay, so we're ready to get back here. There was actually a comment about in the chat about using the smartphone horizontally or vertically. And the interesting thing is you can actually, using CSS media queries when you're building your responsive site, you can detect different orientations and different screen widths and screen heights, and you can change the layout depending on different orientations and the height of the screen or the width of the screen. A lot of websites only just look at the width of the screen and they don't really consider the height of the screen, which is why sometimes when you rotate it horizontally, it might not be quite as nice. Because they might not have considered that aspect ratio. So it really does depend on the site, but you can really optimize to different size screens and different aspect ratio screens depending on how you design that site and depending on how much time you have to really optimize it. Okay, so I do have a reference page here which talks a lot about the things that I'm going to demonstrate. That's nice for your reference, but I really want to just show you some files here and work locally on my machine here to explain screen resolution and file resolution and how all this stuff works. All right. So real quick, when the web got started, we had much smaller screens, and most people had a particular size of screen. So now the screens started smaller than this actually, but these were just 3 examples of different size screens. The idea was that back in the day before mobile, when we had just desktop displays, as we got bigger pixel values, as we got more pixels, that generally meant we were getting bigger screens. So when we had 800 by 600 pixels, right, that's the width by the height. When we went up to 1024 by 768 pixels, that meant that it was a bigger screen. And then when we got up to 1280 by 800, typically more pixels meant bigger screen. Now eventually more pixels started meaning smaller pixels, but for the most part, more pixels was more screen. That all dramatically changed when mobile devices went high res. In particular, the first notable one was the iPhone 3 switching to the iPhone 4. Now I know I'm giving this as an example with an iPhone, but this concept applies to Android and Windows phones and all different types of phones when they went from low res to high res screens. At this point, pretty much all of the devices out there have high res screens. When I'm talking about mobile phones and tablets for the most part, but especially phones, pretty much all the mobile phones out there these days have high res screens. But years ago, when they switched from the iPhone 3 to the iPhone 4, the physical size of the device did not change. The iPhone 4 was the same physical size, but what they did is they doubled the number of pixels. Now here I have greatly reduced the number of pixels here, but imagine, here there were big pixels. And the screen looked good. It looked perfectly fine. We were happy using it. It looked nice. But all of a sudden then when the iPhone 4 came out and they cut the old pixel in half horizontally and vertically. So every old pixel turned into 4 pixels, 2 by 2. So it had twice the number of pixels wide and twice the number of pixels tall. So really the old iPhone 3 amount of pixels fit into a quarter of the new screen. So they were actually 4 times the number of pixels, twice the height and twice the width. The iPhone 4 had a lot more pixels. The biggest difference was that they were smaller. Unlike before, where more pixels meant bigger screen, we didn't have a bigger screen. We had the same size screen. So now those pixels were being put to another use. They were to show more detail. If you think about type or logo fitting into the screen, we wanted everything to be the same size, but we wanted it to be sharper. Once we got used to the iPhone 4, going back to the iPhone 3, you could see the pixels. It wasn't that it looked horrible, it just didn't look as good as the iPhone 4. So when we had the high-res screen, we started to get spoiled by it. Now, this all depends on the quality of your vision. Some people can't see well enough to differentiate between a low-res and a high-res screen. We don't all have perfect vision. A lot of people can differentiate between them, but there is a big portion of the population that their vision just is not good enough to really truly see a big difference, because there is an improvement, but it's it's not something where the old screens looked horrible. They look perfectly fine. The new ones look better, but at some point, as the pixels keep getting smaller and smaller, they're so small that we can't see them. That's why Apple called this the Retina display, because at a normal viewing distance, you literally cannot see the pixels. And so making them even smaller doesn't do any good because you can't see them unless you have bionic eyes. Maybe in the future we'll have bionic eyes and we'll be able to see even more detail. But with the normal human eye, we've kind of reached the limit where we don't need to keep increasing the resolution of our screens because we can't see it, literally. And people with not so great vision might not even be able to see the difference between a low res and a high res. So the iPhone 3 is what we called a 1x screen, and the iPhone 4 was a 2x because it had twice the number of pixels width-wise or height-wise. So 1x and 2x. So a 1x is a low-res screen, and a 2x is a high-res, or as Apple calls it, a Retina screen. So I remember when I first heard about this, I was thinking to myself, how's this going to work? Because when you think about the size of an iPhone, the old iPhone was 320 pixels across, and the new one was 640 pixels across. And I imagined if I had coded my web page as 320 pixels, how is all that going to work? Well, there's a difference between the hardware pixels and the software pixels and how all of this works. So let's talk about an image here, for example. Here I have a 1x image, and down below I have a 2x image. Now notice that if the pixel size is the same size, then the 2x image is exactly twice the size. It's twice the width and twice the height. But that's not how we use it on a device. We don't keep the pixel size the same when we're using our 2x image. Let me explain. If I take that 1x image, let me just hide my things over there so we have more screen space. If I take that 1x image and I put it on a 1x device and a 2x device, and I have it fill up that screen, the 1x device, let's say this is 320 pixels across, and this iPhone is 320 pixels across. This image has 1 pixel for every pixel in the hardware, so this is as good as that image can look on that device. Any more pixels, it wouldn't be able to show the detail. Now on a 2x device, it's going to look exactly the same as it did on the 1x device. That device can show more pixels, but the information isn't there in the image, so there's no more detail to show. It doesn't look worse because it's on a high-res device. It just doesn't look better because there's not extra information in that original image. So it looks the same on a 1x and a 2x when we're filling it out. In this case, even though you could subdivide those pixels and show more detail, that wasn't existing in the original image, so it can't show more detail that didn't exist to begin with. Now you take a 2x image and you squeeze it down, you scale it down to fit onto a 1x and a 2x device. There's lots of pixels in there. Let's say there's 640 pixels. You're going to scale that down to fit 320 pixels, but there's only 320 pixels. There's not enough hardware pixels to show all the detail that's in that image, so that image doesn't look any better on a 1x device. That high-res image is going to look just the same as it does with a 1x image on a 1x device because you're limited by the hardware. It's like putting a color image on a black and white screen. The image is still color, but you can't see it. This is still a high-res image, but you can't see the high-res nature because the screen is the limiting factor. Once you put it onto a 2x display, though, now the hardware has enough resolution, it has enough pixels, little pixels, to show every pixel that's in your image, and now you can see it looking better. So you can give a 2x image to anybody, but it's only going to look better on 2x devices. All right, so the downside to that is the 1x device has to download a bigger file size, and they get no benefit for it. So in an ideal world, we make 1x and 2x graphics so that the 1x device can get a 1x image so it downloads faster, and the 2x device can get the 2x image. Now that said, at this point, I'd say in the mobile realm for phones and tablets, pretty much everybody has 2x devices at this point. So do you really need to make 1x anymore? in a perfectly optimized world, you would still make 1x and 2x for those people that do still have a 1x device. But it kind of depends on, how much time you have, what the budget is, because it is going to be something that needs to be coded. And, for some sites, you might decide, let's just do a properly optimized 2x. And if you really properly optimize, you can get your 2x graphics down pretty good in file size so that they might not be that much bigger than your 1x graphics. Now, that said, also, going back to the 1x, because 1x images still look pretty decent, especially when it comes to photographs. I've noticed that photographs are much more forgiving than things like logos and things. But now those logos should be vector anyway. They shouldn't be pixel-based. So things like photographs, which we're still doing as pixel-based, if you give a 1x photo on a 2x device, not everybody can tell the difference. It might look a little bit better as 2x, but it might not look substantially better for some graphics. And so sometimes you can get away with just giving everybody 1x graphics these days just to make your page load faster. So the main point here is that if you want to be perfect, you can go perfectly 1x and 2x, but resolution is something that's a bit fluid on the web. And you don't actually have to you don't have to say, I'm only going to do 1x and only do 2x. And let me explain a little bit more here, because I want to give you some more examples here. So in terms of the screen resolutions, this is what I was mentioning about there being the software pixels versus hardware pixels. Back on the old iPhone 3, the CSS and the hardware, the software and the hardware, they were the same. When it came to the iPhone 4, the Retina display, though, in software, it's still thought of it as the same size device. Because when we code our web pages using HTML and CSS. Imagine if you had told your web page to fill out an iPhone 3 at 320 pixels. You'd still want it to fill out the screen of an iPhone 4 at the same 320 pixels. So the software, the web browser, understood that there's a difference between the software pixels and the hardware pixels. And they know that for every pixel I say in code, that maybe there's a 1-to-1 relationship between the coded pixels and the hardware pixels, but maybe there's sometimes a 1-to-2, or even a 1-to-3 on some of the newer devices. Some devices now are 3x displays. We don't have to worry about that as far as how we code things. Whenever we're coding with CSS, those are 1x pixels that we're speaking. And what we would do is if we say 320 pixels in CSS, that's going to fill out the iPhone 4 screen. But we have to give it an image that matches the hardware. We have to give it 640 pixels of image, and then it basically scales it to fit into that 320. And by giving it so many pixels and then essentially scaling it in half, what happens when you squeeze an image into a smaller space? Those pixels get smaller. You create a higher resolution image by scaling it down. So we take a lot of pixels and we squeeze them into a small space, and that's what increases the resolution of the file. Let me give you a literal example of this. And I linked to this on my blog post in the presentation here. If you click this link, there's a link to view this file. Whether or not you can see this will depend on a couple things. I'm not sure how the YouTube video compression is going to change this image. The other thing is that if you have enough bandwidth, I don't know if you're streaming in the highest Retina quality, but you would need to really see the full impact of this. You'd really need a Retina screen to show this. I'm streaming in Retina quality. I'm on a Retina display right here. Later down in the page, everybody will be able to see an example of this regardless. But to really see this first example, you really need a Retina display and streaming the highest quality video. Here I took a 2400 pixel image. So in the pixels, in Photoshop, I made it 2400 pixels wide. But I coded it into my web page at half the size. That cranked up the resolution to be 2x. Now I'm going to toggle it, and now this is a 1200 pixel wide image coded to fill the same 1200 pixel space. Now there's a 1-to-1 relationship, which means it's a 1x. Let's toggle it back. This is a 2-to-1, right? It's a 2x image. Now you might be able to see some difference here. You really need a Retina screen to see the full, complete difference, though. There is certainly more detail in the Retina graphic than in the non-Retina graphic. Let's see another example. Here's the Retina graphic. That's 1200 pixels of image squeezed into 1200 pixels in my web page. And this is the 1x, 1200 pixel image displayed in the 1200 pixel space. So you can definitely see that there's some sharpness here that exists in the Retina version that does not exist in the 1x. Is it mind-bogglingly better? Is it so much more phenomenal? It's better, but it's not blow me away better. But it is better. It's certainly sharper. Now, regardless of what screen you have, you'll be able to see some of the difference here. And I wanted to show that resolution is a fluid thing. That these things were proper exactly 1x and 2x graphics because of the way that I coded them. But what if I were to take an image and to use the same image and code it to be different sizes? So here, all of these examples are the same exact image that's 600 pixels wide, and I coded them at different sizes. And the web page determines the resolution that it's displayed at, not the image itself. So like the resolution setting that you see in Photoshop is irrelevant. All that really matters is how many pixels wide your image is, and then are you blowing it up or reducing it within the web page? The web page determines the resolution, not the image itself. So this is 600 pixels image. This image is 600 pixels wide, and I've coded it into a space of 300. Therefore, this version of it ends up being 2x. Looks beautiful. Small, but beautiful. Here, this same 600 pixel image is coded to be 600 pixels. Notice it's twice as big. Now it's only 1x because I've blown it up bigger than the 2x. Same exact image file. Now here, I took the same exact 600 pixel wide image and coded it to be twice as big. So now I'm lowering the resolution even more. Now it's only half x. This does not look very good. It looks blurry and pixelated because I'm enlarging the pixels. And finally, this is the one that I really like to show. Same 600 pixel image, but coded it to be the full width of my screen. I can make this any size that I want, and the resolution is changing as I change the size of my browser. Here it's low res, really low res, because it's so huge. I've blown up this image giant. But as I go smaller and smaller, the quality increases because I'm squeezing those pixels into smaller amounts of space. So this one image can be 1x, 2x, half x. Doesn't matter. All that matters is how am I coding it into a web page. And so when you're creating images in your design apps, what really matters is how big are you planning to use this graphic in your web page? If you're planning it to be 300 CSS pixels within your web page and you want a high-res image, just make it twice that. If you plan on it being 300 pixels, make it 600 pixels. If you plan on it being 200 pixels, make it double that, 400 pixels. Okay, don't worry about the resolution you see in Photoshop. Just make it 72 pixels per inch. It doesn't really matter at all because all that matters is how many pixels wide you make that graphic, and then how big you put it into your web page. So that brings us to working in the design apps. The easiest ones to work in are the vector apps in terms of the simplicity of them. Because their vector, kind of like our web browser is, they understand that one pixel in the software might be different numbers of pixels in your display. There might be like 1 pixel in Sketch, might be 2 pixels in your display. So Sketch and Illustrator and Adobe Experience Design, or XD for short, these are just 3 different design apps that you may be using. They're all vector design apps, so you can design at 1x. For example, if I go to Sketch, let's go to Sketch, and I create a new document, and I insert an artboard. On the right-hand side, we are seeing 1x pixel sizes, the same pixel sizes you would code into your web page. So for example, the iPhone SE, which is the same width as the iPhone 4, the iPhone 5, it's 320 pixels. There you go. When I view this as actual size, which is 100%, this is an appropriate size for the iPhone. And it's going to look great on your display. It's going to look appropriately sized. It's going to look better on a Retina display than a non-Retina display because, of course, on the Retina display you have higher resolution. But it's going to be the same size on both a low-res and a high-res display because this is a vector program. As you create things like type, if you're on a Retina display, that's going to be sharper. If you're on a non-Retina display, it's going to be a little more pixelated. But it's going to be the same size across all those displays. So the same concepts work in, for example, Adobe Experience Design. You can actually see here that the iPhone 6 and 7, or you could do the 5 or the SE. It's the same 320 pixels. So you get the same artboard that's 320 pixels. You could view that at 100%. It's the same size that it was in Sketch. It's what you expect. That the same numbers that you're used to coding in a web page are the same things you're going to be seeing in your design app. Finally, with Illustrator, if I create a new document there, sadly here they don't understand the way that they should be working. They're giving you the hardware pixels, which is actually not what you want to be doing. So I'm very disappointed that they have not made their presets properly. They really should be giving you 1x presets. So you just want to divide these things in half. So instead of 640, you do 320. Oops, type that in wrong. 320. If you're not good at doing the math, like 1136, you can always open up a calculator. On the Mac, you can open up Spotlight and just do 1136 divided by 2. So that's 568. And so just whatever the size of these devices are, they're giving you, like with the iPhone 5, the 6, the 6 Plus, they're giving you the 2x versions. So you need to cut those in half. And then again, when I view this as actual size, 100%, it matches the size of all the other apps. So I know that they got their presets wrong. As long as you get them right, you'll be fine working in them. Okay. And then from there, you can design and you can export your SVG assets from any of these apps. And you can, if you have pixel-based graphics, you can export 1x and 2x versions of those. So those are the easiest because you just design at 1x. Photoshop's a little more tricky because you're going to be designing at 2x. Now, just to go back here for a second, if you're using Illustrator, let's say you want to export an SVG, just so you can see it, because I did mention it, we should be using SVG. So let's say you want to export an SVG. Let's say you want to make a star here. It's generally best to remove the excess artboard that you don't want. And there's a variety of ways. You can use the export asset panel to do this. There's a bunch of ways. I'm going to show you just one way to export stuff from Illustrator. If you have an icon or something in your document and you just want to shrink your artboard to that, you can say artboard and you just say fit to artwork bounds. And that just shrinks up all the excess that you don't need and just gives you exactly what you do need. And there's no background or anything to SVG files. So in this case, I would just be getting a red star. I won't be getting any background as part of the SVG. And then if you have the latest versions of Illustrator CC, you can do export as to create an SVG. If you have an older version of Illustrator, you can do save as SVG. But if you have export as, then do it through that because it's better, cleaner code. It's going to download faster. And choose your SVG down here. I'm going to put this right here. I'm going to call it star SVG. A couple things to think about here. You do not want responsive turned on in Illustrator. It's a poorly named thing, and you'd think you'd want responsive to be turned on, but the reason you don't want that on is because it can create issues with Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge. But what it does, if you have responsive checked on, it does not code in a width and height into your SVG file. So I built this at a specific size. And a lot of times in your design, you design your page, you make an icon at the size you want to use it, and it would be nice if you brought it into your web page if it would just come in at that size. Now this is vector, so we can always make it bigger or smaller after the fact, but it would be nice if when we bring it in, it remembered the size I designed it. If you check on responsive, that means do not code a width and height into the SVG. So if you don't code a width and height, it forgets the size you built it. And when the developer that builds the website brings in the star, it just fills out whatever it's sitting inside of. So it just blows itself up and or shrinks itself down. It just expands to fill its container. And so they always have to code in exactly the width and height that they want that SVG to be. It's better to uncheck responsive, first of all, because it fixes issues with Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge, but also because then there's an initial width and height so that when they bring it in, it comes in at the size you created it. If they want, they can override it, but they don't always have to code a width and height every single time they import that SVG. The other thing is if you have type in there, you might want to convert that to outlines so that the font is not required in your web page. If you are loading the font within the web page, you could keep your text as SVG, so it's live searchable text. But if you don't want to worry about fonts, you can have it convert to outlines. The main thing here is the responsive option to uncheck that. And then you got an SVG file. If you're doing this in Sketch, for example, and you have a shape like a star, you can go down here to the bottom right and click Make Exportable and choose SVG. And you could do that for any element you want. The name of your element over here on the left, so if I call this star icon, that's going to be the name of your file when you go to export. So if you have a variety of different things, let's say you have a polygon over here, and I make that exportable as well. You can actually just select all of them at the same time to make them exportable. You don't have to go one by one. So I'm going to call this another dash icon. So now all of those are exportable. So when I go over here to export, I can export all of those as SVG. And I can go here to pop it in here and export those. So really like the export there in Sketch. And in Sketch, you don't have to worry about that responsive option. That's just something Illustrator does. Sketch puts in the width and height, which is what you want. And if you're using Experience Design and you have some shape that you've drawn, you can select that shape and say export as SVG. You do want to optimize the file size to keep it small. And then I could call this triangle SVG. There we go. So you can also do it in Adobe Experience Design. Those are just a couple ways to export stuff. There are other ways as well, especially in Illustrator. There's a variety of ways. Now, Photoshop's different. Photoshop has a bunch of challenges, and a lot of people use Photoshop still. Hopefully you've seen why Sketch or Experience Design, those apps make it really easy to do design. A lot of people use Photoshop, but you kind of have to know what you're doing more in Photoshop. A lot of people are starting to switch from Photoshop to other user interface design tools like Sketch or Adobe Experience Design. Adobe Experience Design isn't quite ready yet. They're getting close, but it's still in beta. There's still a lot of features that aren't there. When they're officially done with it and it's a 1.0, I think it's going to be a good design app, but it's still lacking a lot of things. So Sketch right now is a really great design app. But let's see how you can work in it. The big difference is that unlike those vector design apps, Photoshop is pixel-based. And it does not understand this whole 1x and 2x stuff. It just understands a pixel is a pixel. That creates a bunch of problems. Let me explain. I'm going to open up two different designs here. All right. And let me create a new file in Photoshop. So I'm going to create a new file in Photoshop here. Now, Photoshop is not vector. It is literal about pixels. So when I go here to mobile, for example, and I choose we've been using the iPhone 4 or 5 or SE as the example, so I'm going to keep using that. It's preset to the Retina size, which actually is appropriate for Photoshop. That's actually what I want. If I choose that preset, which is the hardware pixels, not the CSS software pixels, that is correct for Photoshop. Notice that when I view this at 100% size, that is correct. That matches the size that Sketch, Illustrator, and XD had. Because I'm on a Retina screen. So that's important. You have to understand that if you were on a low-res screen, this would be different. So first let's talk about if you're on a Retina screen, because eventually everybody's going to get a high-res screen. It's going to happen someday. It's like black and white screens. You can't buy a black and white computer screen. It's all color displays. Eventually everything's going to be high-res. That's going to take a while to get there, but eventually it's going to happen. So assuming that, let's start with high-res and then we'll work back. So when the screen and the file matches in Photoshop, we're good. 2x file, 2x screen, everything's beautiful. It looks good. It's a high-res file. My type is going to look sharp. Need to make it really big here. But my screen is high-res. My file is high-res. We're good to go. I can trust 100% size. For example, in the Jive Factory here, this is a 2x file. So if I look at my image size, that's the 640 pixel wide image. If I view that at 100%, that's the appropriate size. It's good. Looks sharp, looks crisp, beautiful. That's what I want. But what if you were on a low-res screen? In your case, in this file, it would be twice as big because you have a low-res display. So in your case, if you're dealing with this high-res file on your low-res screen, you're going to have to zoom out to 50%. So you just zoom out to 50%. Yours will say 50% down here because you're on a different display. When you view that at 50%, you'll be fine. It won't look sharper, it won't look better, but in that image, there's going to be all the potential for those high-res graphics. You just have to be at 50% zoom. Now, on my display, if I dealt with a 1x file, like this image, that's only 320. So this is a low-res file on my high-res display. If I go to the 100%, it's too small. It's half the size it needs to be. But it's a low-res file, and I have the high-res display. If I zoom in to 200% and make it twice as big, it's the correct size, but it does look pixelated. Not horribly so, but it does look pixelated. But actually, if you think about it, that makes sense. It's a low-res file that I blew up to 200%, so it looks pixelated. Low-res file on my high-res screen. My high-res screen has the potential to show more detail, but it's not in this file, so it can't show detail that does not exist. So as long as you know what your screen is and what the file is, you can view this at the proper size. But you really have to know what your file is and what your screen is, unlike all the other apps where you didn't have to know. There wasn't designing in 1x files or 2x files. In the other apps, you just design it as 1x, and it looks great on every screen. Retina screens just look better. Now, this detail here is in the presentation. I put all this, like if you match, let's say you're on a low-res screen with the low-res file, then 100% is correct. You can trust they're going to appear the right size. It's when they don't match. Like when they match, when you have a 1x to 1x, you got 100% is correct. When it's 2x to 2x, 100% is correct. It's when they don't match. When you're on a low-res file on a high-res screen, you got to make it bigger. When you have a high-res file on your low-res screen, you got to zoom out to 50%. Now, because of that, with Photoshop, because it's pixel-based, you got to make sure you use smart objects as much as you can. Smart objects are when you place in things using file place. Typically, place embedded is a little bit easier to work with, but when you place embedded, it's going to pull in all your high-res original pixels into your file, and then you can make it bigger and smaller without having to worry about losing quality, as long as you're not going bigger than your original was. But in your design, you often are playing around with size, and you don't know exactly how big it's going to be. Typically smaller than you brought it in, but you just don't know how big it's going to be. The reason that's important is because if you're working in a low-res file, you're going to have to export 2x versions, which are going to be twice this size. And so in that image, you need that smart object to have all the original resolution so it can afford to blow it up twice as big. And it's going to be able to look into that smart object to find the extra resolution. If you're not working with smart objects, when you go to blow those pixels up, you're just going to get bigger blurry files. You're not going to get something that actually looks sharper. Photoshop also is not good at exporting SVG. So if you want to export an SVG, you're going to have to, this was created in Photoshop, which creates a problem. See, if this was created in Illustrator, then it would have been easy. But because like some parts are in Illustrator, some parts are in Photoshop, this is kind of a mess. And that's part of the issue is that Photoshop can only export SVG from native elements. So like this type, it could export as SVG, but the bottle cap was brought in as a smart object from Illustrator. It was placed in as a smart object from Illustrator. And when you place something in from Illustrator, even though there's vectors behind it, Photoshop can't access that. So really, you want to keep your vector work to Illustrator, and you can bring that in by either copying and pasting it as a smart object or placing it as a smart object. But don't do this. Like, don't mix and match some things in Photoshop with some things from Illustrator, because you're not going to be able to get one unified SVG file. You know, like this bottle cap, I could double click on that here in Photoshop, go over to Illustrator, and from here, I can save out an SVG file. But Photoshop is not good at exporting SVGs because it's a pixel-based program. Oh, there's a question in the chat. You can't just flatten it? Well, if you flatten it, you get pixels. You don't get vectors. So no, you absolutely can't flatten, because then you're just going to get pixels, and then there's no point in doing SVG, because you need to keep it as vectors. So that's what makes Photoshop more and more challenging as time goes on, because the more vector type stuff you do, the more iconography, the more logos. Photoshop is not the great place to do that work. You really need a vector tool like Sketch or Illustrator or Adobe Experience Design, one that's going to be better at natively working with vectors and exporting SVG easily. Photoshop just isn't as good with SVG. Final, you can import SVG, but it still can't export SVG properly. It does have SVG exports. It's just a lot of times it flattens pixels into them, which is absolutely not what you want at all. So that creates challenges. Now, this issue here, let's jump back to Photoshop for this. Okay, so let me close this here. When it comes to sizing type, notice that these two files look exactly the same. In fact, let me put these next to each other. I'm going to put them next to each other. So they look exactly the same, right? Except, I should say, same size. The 1x size looks pixelated. The 2x looks sharp. I know you might not be able to see that depending on your screen or your streaming quality, but trust me, the 1x on the right here looks low quality. The 2x looks nice and sharp. You can tell here in the title whether it's 1x or 2x. If I look at the type size, even though they aesthetically look the same, this type size is 16.29 pixels, which shouldn't be a fractional thing like that. It should be something like 16. And then over here, let's go over here to this other one. Again, shouldn't be fractional. Let's make it just 32. Notice that's 32. So no, wait a minute. So this is 32 over here. And over here, it's 16. Now, if you did the math there, 16 times 2 is 32. So everything in the 2x file is doubled. Now, that's a bit challenging because unlike all the other design apps where this doesn't happen, Photoshop is so literal about pixels. It can't figure out that 16 pixel type can be 32 pixels of hardware. Browsers figure this out. Vector apps figure this out. Let me give you an example of this. So here, pull this out here so you guys can see this. See, a web browser, when you code in, there we go. When you code in 20 pixels in CSS, that's not a literal 20 pixels. On a 1x screen, it's going to use 20 pixels to render that. But on a 2x screen, it's going to have to use 40 pixels. They did this because you can't go back and recode like, well, it's 20 pixels on a 1x and 40 pixels on a 2x. No, we just have to give it one size. So giving it that pixel size in code, the browsers understand, oh, I'm a 2x screen, so I know you say 20 pixels, but I'll use 40. Or if it's a 3x screen, they'll say, well, I know you said 20 pixels, but I'll really use 60 pixels to render that. So browsers know this because they're vector for those types of things. Photoshop's not. Photoshop's not that. In a browser, you can say 20 pixels. You get always the same size, but 2x just looks nicer. In Photoshop, you literally have to say 20 pixels for 1x, and you have to do the math to get to 40 pixels for 2x. So basically what that means is that as much as I like working in 2x files, the thing I don't like is that all my type sizes are doubled the way that I'm going to code. So if I do 32 pixels in Photoshop in a 2x file, when I code that web page up, it actually has to be half that. It has to be 16 pixels. That's the downside to it. And that means that you actually have to be careful about doing type sizes. So for example, you don't want to do 31 pixels because you're going to have to cut that in half. And if you cut 31 pixels in half, you're going to end up with 15 and a half pixels. And you can't do half pixels in CSS. So you need to make sure you work in even amounts. So 2, 4, 6, 8, doesn't matter what you do, as long as it's an even amount. Don't do odd amounts. That goes for everything. Type sizes, widths of elements, strokes. Don't do a 1 pixel stroke or a 3 pixel stroke because they always have to be cut in half. Everything. Even 2, 4, 6, 8, type sizes, strokes, everything. It's the one thing I don't like about working in a 2x file in Photoshop, but I'm willing to deal with that because everything else is really nice. Oh yeah, so somebody's asking, that in the chat, because Sketch is a Mac, it's only for Mac people, is there a better choice for PC people? Once Adobe Experience Design is ready, that I think is the main choice. There is also another app called Figma, which is kind of a developing new app as well that some people like to use on PC. Figma's a web app only though, but I would say that Adobe Experience Design, keep an eye on that. It's still behind the Mac version on Windows, unfortunately. So you're still like even the Mac version isn't finished yet, and the PC version is even less finished. It's still in beta, but I think as the months progress, it's going to continue to improve. And once they finish it and it's ready, I think Adobe Experience Design is going to be a great cross-platform choice for Mac and PC users. In the meantime, if you're a Mac user and can use Sketch, definitely highly recommend Sketch. It's a really, really nice design tool. But looking forward, Adobe Experience Design is definitely going to be a good option too. At least that's how it's looking right now. It's still early stages, so I reserve the ability to change my mind later on. So, but it's looking good. It's looking promising. So you can deal with Photoshop, but you have to be careful. It requires more knowledge. I actually have a blog post on my website that talks all about the comparisons of designing in 1x and 2x and the pros and cons about it. So if you want to read more details, read that blog post. Gives you a lot more information. Okay, so moving on. Now that we talked about 1x versus 2x, how big should you make elements? I talked about making things tappable. So Apple says in their human interface guidelines that things should at least be 44 by 44 points. Now notice that they say points. And the reason for them saying points is because points are a physical real-life measurement. Pixels are not. Like 1 pixel can be big or it can be small. And so when they meant 44 points, that was a way that they could always say the same amount. And if you're on a low-res screen, there's a 1-to-1 relationship. 1 point equals 1 pixel. So you're 44 by 44 pixels. But if you're on a 2x display, that would be 88 pixels. So in Photoshop, for example, you need to make sure that it's 88 pixels if you're in a 2x file, or 44 pixels if you're in a 1x. So remember that Sketch and Illustrator and XD, they are always talking about 1x. So you do 44 pixels in Sketch and Illustrator and XD. And that's the tappable area. It doesn't have to be the size of it. Let me give you an illustration here. So each one of these things where the red bar is, those are all 44 points tall. So if these were 1x screenshots on old devices, they would be 44 pixels tall. But this was made on an iPhone 6S. And so this is a 2x display. So these are 88 pixels tall. But if you actually physically measure them with points, it'd be 44 points. But notice the icon in there. The icon is not the entire height. The same thing with the text. The text is not the entire height, but the whole area is tappable. That whole area is tappable. Even their keys are also 44 points, which is interesting. Okay, enough about graphics. Let's move on to some other things. Fonts. Make sure that your fonts are licensed for whether they're going to be used in a website or an app. Oftentimes they might have different licenses. They might charge you more for an app than a website. They might not license you for any of those uses. You have to check to make sure. Look at them on 1x and 2x displays to make sure that you're not surprised, especially by thin typefaces. I use an app called Switch Res X, which allows me to switch my resolution from low res to high res. So, for example, here I can choose a high DPI or a low DPI. It's like, for example, here I can choose high DPI or low DPI. So this is the 1x and this is the 2x. I only use Switch Res X because I need to use it to do the YouTube specific resolution. If you don't have to do that, you don't have to pay for this app. There's a free Mac app called Display Menu, which lets you choose this. And in there, it's not the most intuitive icons, but the ones that are white are high DPI, they're 2x. The ones with the gray backgrounds are the low DPI, they're the 1x. So gray background, 1x, white background, 2x. You can actually, when you see the same number, because I'll actually show more of them when you're looking in the menu, you'll see the same number with a white or a gray background. You can actually make your high-res display look like a 1x. And so that's what I do. The only way you can see how a 2x display looks is to be on a 2x display. If you're on a low-res display, you just can't see some things. That's why I think any designer needs to get a high-res display at this point, because there's just no way else that you can see how a 2x looks without having a 2x display. You could take that high-res display and lower the resolution so you can see what it looks like on a 1x, but you can't do the other way around. I don't have an equivalent of that app for Windows, just because I normally don't design on Windows. I know a lot about Windows, but I don't know if they have an equivalent app. There may be something built into Windows. I'm just not sure how that side of it works. But if you can make your high-res display look low-res, maybe you can preview it. That way you can avoid surprises. Mainly 1x displays are still left on the desktop, not on mobile or tablets. Now, as we're designing in Photoshop or Sketch or Adobe Experience Design, wouldn't it be really cool to see your design live as you work? To me, that's a huge, incredible benefit. It's actually one of the reasons why I don't really like using Illustrator to design, because there's not a live preview app dedicated to Illustrator. Only Sketch, Photoshop, and Adobe Experience Design have kind of side apps that you can use to preview on your mobile device while you work. And remember how I talked about earlier about testing out designs like for finger friendliness and like seeing them in real life it's just better seeing them in real life so that you can see how big it is. It could be a different relationship than it is on your screen. So let me show you how this works. So if I'm in Photoshop here and I have my design open, and I'm going to open up my 2x display. Oh, no, sorry, I'm in Illustrator there. Let's go to Photoshop here. I'm going to open up my 2x one. It does work best if you have a 2x phone and you have a 2x file. Works a little bit better. I'm going to pull up my iPhone here. Normally you just look at it in real life, but just so you guys can see this, I'm going to pull it up on the screen. I'm going to do a little screencast thing so you guys can see it. Okay. So normally you don't pull it up on your screen. I'm only doing this for the demonstration here in this video because you don't have a way to see my thing in real life. So here, just pretend you're looking at your phone in your hand, and you get, if you're doing Photoshop, you get the Adobe Preview app. In the presentation, I link to get this. Unfortunately for Photoshop, the preview app is only available for iOS. It is not available for Android. It's been a couple years. I don't know if they're ever going to make an Android version of it. So we're going to open up the Adobe Preview app. All right. And so then you open up your file here in Photoshop. You want to be on the same Wi-Fi network, or you can be plugged in by USB. Boom, look at that. Just automatically opens up your file on your device, and you can scroll through it. But as you do work, check it out. Whatever you do is instantly beamed, or there might be a little bit of a delay here, sent to your device, and you can work on this in real time as you do stuff. So maybe I say buy tickets, and then I make this a little bit bigger. And then a moment later, comes over onto the device. And it makes such a big difference seeing how this works. Sorry, I wanted to do that because I accidentally hid my chat. I want to just see if anybody was talking in the chat. To be able to see this in real life and hold it in your hand and see like touching things, like how big is it underneath your finger, seeing the size relationships between the type, it's hard to explain, but it makes a big difference in your design to see it in real life, not on your computer screen. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. Photoshop makes that easy if you're using Photoshop. If you're using Sketch, you can also do the same kind of thing. So let me go to Sketch, and I'm going to open up the sketch file here. Let's do this one. Okay. Now Sketch, let's pull this over here. Sketch has Sketch Mirror, so I'm going to launch that app. And so here's all the artboards in the sketch file that I have open. And I could just tap on one of those to open it up. And let's say I start to work on this. As I move things around, you get to see it update just like you did in Photoshop. No saving, just as you work, it updates. You can again scroll through. It's awesome. So Sketch works pretty similarly. And Adobe Experience Design is basically the same kind of thing when you're in Adobe Experience Design. Adobe XD here. Let's open up Pulse. All right. So here we are here. On my phone, there's an Adobe XD app I can open up. For that, you have to be plugged in by USB. They're not doing it over Wi-Fi. And again, whatever you're seeing here, I'm missing a couple fonts on my phone, but that's okay. Whatever you see on XD on your desktop here, as you work. Now, look at the speed of that. That is like instantaneous. Because I'm plugged in by USB, it's sending it live really fast. Works really nice. And the cool thing is that I can actually, I've done some prototyping here, so I can actually tap on the things on my phone and do the prototyping, like interact with it like I normally would, like, because you can actually set up some prototypes here. So you can connect, like, hey, this goes to that when you touch it. And you can actually preview those things in addition to just seeing how it aesthetically works. So you can preview all your designs live as you work, which is pretty awesome stuff. All right, so let me turn that on, that off. Actually, I might need that in a moment, so let's just come back to that. When you're designing, if you want to design on a grid, Bootstrap is a common design grid that we work on. I created some free templates that you can use. There's a bunch of interface templates, like if you're designing for iPhone or designing for Android. I have a bunch of links here that you can use. Just wanted to create a collection of resources for you. If you're designing mobile apps, there's a bunch of reference here that you can use. If you're designing app icons, there's templates that you can use. So you pop in your icon and it can generate all the different sizes that you need. Sketch has some built in, but here's some other ones for iOS and Android. If you want to create favicons for websites, you can actually on your phone, for example, here if I go to, let's go to one of the pages on my site. I'm going to go to this page here. Okay, so let's say you wanted to save this to your home screen. If you tap on the little icon down here at the bottom, and then say add to home screen, I'll say Mac tips, add, and then that saves it to your home screen. So how do you get this nice little icon right there? You get it by going to this website, and you can give it your picture, and it'll generate all the stuff that you need. It's really awesome. All right, email. More people are opening email than on desktop nowadays. If you want the stats to back it up, here you go. The easiest way is just to design a single column. Had that on Do Not Disturb. Not sure why that sound went off. The easiest way is just to design as a single column with images that will scale and type that will reflow. You can create more complex layout. They're just going to take more time and more work to code. It's gotten a lot better doing responsive layouts because Gmail, which was really bad about supporting CSS media queries for a long time, they finally support media queries in most accounts. There's still some people using Gmail in certain situations where it doesn't support it. You can actually read more about that here. But we can do much better emails than we could years ago and have them work on a much greater range of devices. But the simplest thing is if you just make a single column, and this is a graphic. I know that it's text, but it was a graphic because of all the relationships and everything. This was just a screenshot of something that we were coding. That graphic just scales down to a smaller device. But notice it still looks fine on any size device because we designed it for mobile in mind. And it's okay if it gets bigger, but we knew we wanted it to look okay on a small device. So this image scales. Now the logo does not scale. The things that are over here we just got rid of because they're not super essential on a mobile device. And then the text, you can either keep it the same size or you might want to even bump it up a little bit or reduce it. You can change the type size across different devices if you want. But even if you keep it the same size, notice that it reflows. So the type can reflow to fit the smaller screen but still be optimal size. And some of the graphics can scale. Much easier if you do keep it a single column. You can create more complex layouts, but they're going to require more work. We actually have some classes if you want to build responsive emails. If you want to learn how to code them, we have some classes you can check out. My final thought, just to end, I know we're running just a couple minutes late here. Thanks for hanging on. Animation. Make your design something special and exciting and cool. Make it delightful. Make it memorable. Don't just keep it static. Use animation if you can. If you're in apps, you can use sound. Not cool to use it on websites, but you can use it on apps. And so let me give you a couple examples here in websites. Notice they're indicating that I can do something there, so let me click on that. And they animate this through the whole way, but even they're showing this thing, which normally happens on mobile devices, they animate their interface. So they're telling me a story with animation, but they're showing me the animations that they use within their interface. All sorts of subtle little things. But they're leading me through this process, showing me with cool animations. Like if you watch how this interaction works on mobile, see how it slides over, and you enter it in, and then when you're done, it slides over. The button changes with a little animation. So the website has animation, but they're actually showing a thing that works on mobile with, oh, cool. And then they led me to the next page so I can learn more. Not the next page, but the next section down below so I can learn more. Stripe does all sorts of cool things. Look at the menu that slides out. And all of their sections here have interesting little animations typically that happen in the background. No, except for that one. Let's do Atlas. See, they just have all sorts of little interesting animations that are happening on the page. Really cool website. Full Story does the same kind of storytelling thing. which is cool. We're not going to wait through the whole thing. This is an example of just interesting transitions. Just cool transitions. Much more memorable than just the stuff appearing. And final one, which is a crazy thing for Los Angeles trying to do their Olympic bid in 2024. Lots of animation here. Look at when I come near the nav, it like magnetizes to my cursor. And then there's just so much animation going on here. So many little subtle effects. I think my computer's struggling just a little bit because I'm streaming and doing all this stuff. I have all these apps open. Normally this performs a bit better frame rate wise. So really cool website you should explore. Just some examples in websites. Come on. Waiting for my browser to respond. Let me close that window. I think Chrome, there we go. Chrome was not liking whatever was going on. It's like, I'm getting tired. Okay, here we go. And in apps, there's some cool animations. Let me just show you one of them. And I know it's such a subtle little thing, but it's a fun little animation in the Yelp app. Put on my sharing here again. Check out the top thing right here where I pull down. Watch this part right here. When I pull down, oh look, there's a little animal. And I can put him in a rocket and I can send him off and that refreshes. Boop. Just fun little things. If you can make it amazing, if you can make it something memorable, that's going to just make people like your stuff, talk about it, share it. Websites like the Now You See Me Too website, this is a crazy animation website. Tons of cool stuff that they're doing here. And for a lot of these animations, you can use something called GreenSock, which is a JavaScript animation library that we teach. You could do all sorts of amazing things with GreenSock. This is a scrolling website that as I scroll, look at this. Man, look at that. I could scroll back and forth. Turn off the sound there. They're doing like a hall of mirrors kind of thing to show each of the people that are in the movie. Next comes up my favorite part after you're done with the Hall of Mirrors. It's raining, and then you see the raindrops freeze, and then they trap all that in a raindrop. Boom! Look at that. It's such a cool website. All based on animation, creating a totally different experience. So cool. So, we have bunches of ways that you can learn more if you want to. We have Photoshop classes. We have a Photoshop for Web specific class. We have a Sketch class, Adobe Experience Design. If you want to learn coding, we have individual coding classes or a web design certificate where it puts it all together. Our mobile and responsive web design class is for people that already know some coding but just want to learn how to code responsive web pages in particular. Responsive email if you want to learn how to code responsive emails. And want to open up for people that are here live to open up questions. See what you're thinking, if you have any that you haven't already asked. And if you're heading out, just want to say thanks for everybody for attending. Don't forget that this presentation link is in the video description. And keep that link around. I put tons of resources in there, so hopefully those are useful for you to refer back to later. Remember also that for any of our classes, if it says New York City or live online, you can come to New York City and take our class if you want to, but you can also do a screen share into the instructor's computer and you attend the same class that some people are attending live in New York City. And if you ever have issues, we can screen share into your computer and see what's going on. But the workbooks you can purchase separately. Are typically, they come with a class. So if you take a class, you get the workbook. And so we send you, if you're attending live online, we send you an ebook version of it. And that way you can still go through the exercises just like the people that are attending in class. And it's a cool experience if you can't make it to New York City. And if you can't do the class, the workbooks are the next best thing too. They're great step-by-step books. And for any of these things, we typically have a workbook that you can check out. So you can check out which classes you want to take, or you can buy the book, and those are available in ebook or print. Or if you want to get the bundle, you can get the bundle too. And that GreenSock class that I was mentioning, HTML5 animation with GreenSock, you do have to know HTML and CSS to create your web page. And you ideally should know some JavaScript before getting into this, because it is JavaScript. But this is an amazing way to add animation. You can animate SVG files or any element on your page. And that is a class as well as a book. Great ways to learn more about animation if you want to. All right, so it looks like nobody else has questions in the chat. So just want to say thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you get notified of future videos. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great weekend.